Los Angeles now has a curfew. Immigration raid protests spread to other cities. The California governor escalates his rhetoric against the president. House Majority Leader Steve Scalise joins us to talk baseball, the gunshot that changed his life, and the future of the Trump economic agenda. And the EPA says it will roll back limits on carbon dioxide and mercury pollution from power plants fired by fossil fuels. Hello, everyone. I'm Major Garrett in Washington. Welcome to the Takeout. Los Angeles remains, in the main, calm. Mayor Karen Bass has imposed a curfew. This gives police wider authority to maintain order in a 1 square mile area of the city from 8 p.m. to 6 a.m. local time. 1 square mile. Los Angeles covers roughly 500 square miles. That is a ratio we should all carefully consider. The Los Angeles police chief said the curfew will address, quote, a concerning escalation in unlawful and dangerous behavior, unquote. Other officials in Los Angeles said today that property damage so far there is in the, quote, millions. The National Guard continues to protect the federal building in downtown. That's the epicenter of protests linked to aggressive immigration raids across the city. About 700 Marines finished a second day of training today. They are not yet on the street. Marine leaders say they may assist in future immigration arrests. For now, the Marines will be focused on crowd control, an atypical mission in an American city. We start tonight with Ed O'Keefe at the White House on the North Lawn. Ed, the control room is going to bring up a map of 12 different cities in America where other protests of one kind or another are now occurring in reaction to immigration enforcement actions. How is the White House regarding that?
Well, they're keeping an eye on those protests, Major, and if things start to look remotely like what went on in Los Angeles over the weekend, don't be surprised if we get word that perhaps military personnel or Guard will be sent in. But it was notable this morning when the Attorney General was here chatting with reporters. I asked her, are you monitoring other cities? Is there the potential for deployments like what we see in LA to go into other cities? And she almost immediately said, well, look, if protests happen and they're peaceful, or if the local police step in right away to try to quell them, we've got no issue with that. And she credited NYPD, for example, up in New York, for how they treated protesters in the streets last night, giving them multiple warnings, then stepping in and either arresting or moving, dispersing crowds that were in areas where they had been told not to be. So no definitive plan to go anywhere else. And then, of course, we know the Texas Governor Greg Abbott is apparently mobilizing Guard to go to San Antonio and potentially other cities in that state. He's doing that on his own without federal assistance, although he appears to be doing it without having checked with the local mayor. But other than that, there is the warning the president gave yesterday that if protesters decide to get out there in the coming days and get violent, don't be surprised if the Guard or the Marines show up. And that was reiterated today by the White House press secretary, saying that they will do that if things get out of hand.
And one of the parts of the drama playing out in Los Angeles, to the degree it's still dramatic, is that the Los Angeles police and the federal authorities who have been deployed there, the National Guard and others, they're just simply not on the same page. They're viewing their mandates differently. This is Jim McDonnell, the Los Angeles police chief. Let's listen.
They have a different mission. They're working in support of the federal agencies that are working with ICE on civil immigration enforcement and criminal immigration enforcement. We're not involved in that. We're involved in protecting the residents of Los Angeles and restoring order to the streets that are impacted.
So that's the local mission, and there is also now the ongoing conflict between the president and the governor of California.
Yeah, and look, that's standard practice across the country. ICE does what it needs to do, what it is decided to do, and doesn't have to, and usually does not, give a heads up to local or state law enforcement that they're doing something, because A, it removes the element of, it would affect the element of surprise if that's what they're after, and B, they're not required to let them know necessarily. So when the LAPD chief says that, that's not out of the norm. It's just obviously very confusing and crowded there right now because you're dealing, as you've pointed out rightly for the last several nights, small area in a big city, a lot of attention going to one spot, and thousands of federal personnel showing up amid local and state law enforcement doing their thing. And yes, then there is what the governor and the president are doing and saying about each other. That address last night by Governor Newsom, not only speaking, of course, to his constituents there in the Golden State, but seemed to be projecting to the rest of the country and the world that what you're seeing here is potentially coming to other parts of the country, and democracy is on the line. And those words initially rang out to Republican critics, especially, saying, oh, here we go. The Democrats are going to try to make this about democracy. We've been making it about public safety and law and order. And if they're not concerned about that, so be it. But we are, and we believe that polling and public support will be on our side.
Ed O'Keefe in the North Lawn of the White House, as always. Thank you, sir. I appreciate it. The Congressional Baseball Game is tonight at Nats Park, Nationals Park, here in Washington. It's an annual affair. Democrats and Republicans square off in this pretty friendly rivalry played, believe it or not, before an estimated crowd tonight in excess of 30,000 spectators. Almost 8 years ago to the day, Louisiana Republican Steve Scalise, now the House Majority Leader, was at a practice for that game. Scalise was shot just after 7 a.m. by a rifle-wielding left-wing extremist. Dozens of shots were fired. Scalise was wounded as he stood near second base and then crawled to the outfield before lapsing into shock. The bullet shattered his hip, damaged internal organs. Scalise arrived at the hospital in critical condition with severe internal bleeding. I spoke to Scalise this morning about the issues of the day, of course, but we started with his story of survival. I don't want to dwell on this, but I have to believe everything around this event and what happened to you filters through every year you come to this game and prepare for this event.
Yeah, you know, it's really a sign of how the comeback happened, how long it took for me to, 3.5 months in the hospital, having to learn how to walk again. And, one of the motivations I had is I wanted to come back the next year and play in the game. I really did. And I had to put a lot of time into it to get to that point. The next year I was able to start. I couldn't move around a lot, but I got to start at second base and just take one inning in. And it was just, every year I get to do this, it's a treat.
It's a gift.
It's a gift. Look, I know how close I came to not being alive. I mean, I'm lucky to be alive. I get to play a kid's game. It's like magical to be able to do this. And, I thank God every day that I get this opportunity, because it easily could have gone the other way back in 2017.
How hard was the rehab?
The rehab was brutal. I mean, I had, spent 3.5 months in the hospital. A lot of that time was just laying on a bed where I couldn't even move. I mean, it shattered my femur. I had a lot of internal damage. I couldn't even walk or put weight on my foot for a month and a half. So they didn't know if I'd be able to walk again.
And all that time, everything around you is atrophying.
Yeah, and everything is getting weaker. You're frustrated because you want to move around, but you can't because your hip could shatter again. They had plates and screws holding it all together. And then by the time I could actually put weight on it, that alone was just a milestone. And then I had these machines that kind of helped me walk again. And I had to literally learn that whole process, and walking stairs, things that seem easy and trivial to people, took me weeks and weeks to learn how to figure out how to do again.
How do you feel now?
I feel really good. I mean, never felt better. I went through a bout of cancer a year and a half ago. I'm in remission now. So, I've had a great team of doctors that got me through that period. And now I just focus on listening to my doctors, taking care of my health, but having fun and enjoying life. I've got a wonderful family. We just spend a lot of time together. I've got a job that's high pressure, demanding, but I love it. I get to work with a lot of people that I have a lot of respect for and have a great love and appreciation for. And when you get to go to work every day and you like the people you work with, you love what you're working on. Not every day is easy, as we all know, but I'm lucky to be alive. I'm lucky to be able to do what I love doing.
After you've been through what you've been through, do you view the stakes of politics differently?
I do, in the sense that I know what's really important in life. And while some of these, you're in a room with 20 people over a big issue and everybody's yelling and screaming, and I just don't get that worked up over those things, because I know we're going to figure this out. We're going to get it. But the things that get me worked up are, what I almost lost, and I didn't. And so I just appreciate the moment. And I think for a lot of people, the perspective of having to go through what I went through and coming out of it alive, the people say, oh, did you change? I didn't change in who I am as a person. What I changed in is knowing what's important in life.
Talk to me about where the president's economic agenda is in the Senate and the schedule, what you guys are going to get done or not get done by July 4th.
Yeah, we put a really aggressive schedule together to get this bill through the House by Memorial Day. We said over and over that's when we would get it passed, and a lot of people said it couldn't get done. It was a very bold agenda. We had a lot of complicated issues to work through internally amongst Republicans, and it was well documented. Yet we got it done, and with very narrow margins. We don't have a big majority. We had a 2-seat majority through half of that period. Then we had those 2 specials in Florida and got a 4-seat majority, big whopping 4-seat. And yet we still passed a bill without a vote to spare, and we knew that, but we got it done. And now the Senate's got the bill, and I'm confident they're going to take care of their business. We said July 4th is when we want the bill on President Trump's desk, and I think we're going to hit that goal.
What's your advice to the Senate on modifications?
My
Tread
advice
lightly?
to the Senate is just go through the same things we did. Bring members in, on all sides of the political spectrum. We had ultra-conservatives, moderates, and everybody in between. And yet we all had to come together, because if everybody just held out and said, unless I get everything I want, I'm voting no, we would have never had a bill. And so the Senate's got the same dynamics. When it's a bill that the Democrats have all walked away from, and we know that, then the Republicans in the Senate need to get together, and they don't need all 53. They can get about 10 people. That is a good cross-section. And we had a lot of those meetings with 15, 20 cross-sectional members that represent our whole conference. And that's how we worked through the most complicated issues, where everybody fought for what they wanted, but also looked across the table and realized somebody else is fighting for the opposite thing. And if we don't come together, it doesn't happen. This is too important for the economy of the nation, for those blue-collar workers who went to the polls and said, we want President Trump in a Republican Congress. We have to deliver, and this bill is what delivers those promises to all of those families who are counting on us. We're going to get it done.
What is your take on Los Angeles and the president's rapid deployment of not just the National Guard against the wishes of the mayor and the governor, but the Marines in an American city?
Yeah, I think when most Americans look at this first of all, the number one issue in America during the election last year was border security. Anywhere you went, it wasn't just along the border. Every state said, secure America's border, and President Trump ran on that. Kamala Harris said she was going to keep the border open. So the voters had a choice, and they said, we want Donald Trump to secure the border, and he's done it by and large. He had over a 90% reduction. Now, you look at Los Angeles, this is a direct result of lawlessness, of a state saying, we want people to come here illegally. Waving a foreign country's flag in a major American city offends most Americans. And if the governor won't protect his own people, they're calling it peaceful protests again. They're burning down cities, they're looting stores, they're attacking law enforcement officers. That's not peaceful. And so somebody's got to bring law and order again and protect the citizens of America. And if Gavin Newsom won't do it, then President Trump will.
What about the idea, long articulated by you and other Republicans, of local control and not having the federal government step in and run everything?
Now look, all of us, from your local mayor all the way up to the President of the United States, we take an oath to uphold the Constitution, but also to protect the citizens of this country. And if just because somebody else should be doing it, the president can't just look and go, oh, well, it's somebody else's job. And even though they're not doing it and the citizens aren't safe in those communities, I'll just look the other way. That's not who Donald Trump is. And the American voters knew that when they elected him. He's going to protect the people of this country. And that's why he's deporting the violent criminals who came here to hurt people. We'd like to think everybody comes here pursuing the American dream. That's not what was going on.
Still to come, have you ever had regrets at 3 a.m.? Elon Musk's middle-of-the-night attempt to patch things up with President Trump. It's not uncommon for a new president and a like-minded Congress to pass a big budget bill. Democrat Susan DelBene, who joins us later, predicts that bill, the one named Big and Beautiful, will give House Democrats an electoral edge in 2026.
Republicans are simply too extreme for everyday Americans and aren't focused on the priorities of working families.
And the Biden administration renamed military bases that once honored Confederate soldiers. President Trump is bringing back those names, but not the secessionist history behind them. All that ahead on The Takeout. Welcome back to the Takeout. Here is a look at what we and now you are watching this evening. The U.S. and China have reached a partial deal on trade. The details are still a little murky, but the main attributes of it is it will allow the U.S. access to rare earth minerals and magnets, while China regains access to jet engines, computer chips, and student visas. U.S. tariffs of 55% will remain on Chinese imports. Now, the U.S. needs access to rare earth minerals for defense and electric vehicle manufacturing. China craves computer chips for its artificial intelligence development projects. The race for New Jersey's next governor is now set. Trump-endorsed Republican Jack Ciattarelli will face Democratic Congresswoman Mikey Sherrill. Ciattarelli cruised to victory, while Sherrill outlasted several Democratic challengers and must now unify the party's progressive and moderate factions. Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth testified before Senate appropriators. You know, those are the ones who oversee the Pentagon budget. And at one point, Rhode Island Democratic Senator Jack Reed told Hegseth deploying the National Guard and Marines to Los Angeles was illegal, in his words. He said local authorities were best equipped to protect public safety and manage protests. The Environmental Protection Agency announced significant rollbacks to power plant pollution limits. The agency has proposed cutting regulations that curb air pollution from fossil fuel power plants in an effort, it says, to boost economic growth. The rules were put in place first by the Biden administration to fight climate change. I want to bring in national environmental correspondent David Schechter, who joins us from Bridgeport, Connecticut. David, what is the significance of what the EPA announced today?
Hey, Major. So break that down into two pieces. The first rule that the EPA wants to revoke are controls over carbon dioxide from power plants, essentially. Carbon dioxide is the driver of climate change, gets into the atmosphere, and that's what warms up our planet. The second thing they'd like to revoke is the amount of mercury that comes out of power plants. That is a powerful neurotoxin, and that's what comes out of really coal-fired power plants. So the industry, without these regulations, the EPA says, would save $1.2 billion a year in additional costs, but it also would make it easier for those industries to pollute. As you mentioned, these were Biden-era regulations, and these rules just came in effect in 2024 and have not actually been implemented yet. There's a timeline for them to be implemented. So what the Trump administration is saying is, we don't want those rules, we won't implement them, and that will make it easier on businesses, lowering regulation on the businesses. I would add one more thing that I think is pretty interesting, politically, that Administrator Zeldin of the EPA, Administrator Lee Zeldin, is saying now that carbon dioxide from power plants is not a significant contributor to climate change. And so if that is then the case, then the EPA wouldn't have to regulate that anymore as a pollutant. But in fact, that is actually not true. According to the EPA's own information, which I've looked at many, many times in putting together reports, carbon dioxide is 31% of our carbon dioxide in this country is coming from the power industry, from the creation of power. It is the number two the number two driver of climate change gases in this country. And so what now the EPA is saying is, we don't want to regulate that as much from power plants, and in fact, we don't want to regulate that really at all, Major.
David Schechter, thank you so much. I appreciate that. Joining me now, White House correspondent Shelby Talcott and Tyler Pager. Shelby writes for Semaphore. Tyler writes for a scrappy publication you might have heard of, the New York Times. Tyler is also the co-author of a new book coming out next month. The title, 2024, How Trump Retook the White House and Democrats Lost America. Tyler and Shelby, it's great to have you with us. Shelby, you have some reporting I want to jump into about the big economic bill for the Trump administration in the Senate and a mysterious $1 billion that Senate Republicans suddenly found in the bill. They don't know what it's for or what it's about. This sounds like a mystery.
Yeah, so this is $1 billion in this massive bill for the Defense Production Act, which has been used regularly throughout history, more recently during the pandemic, to boost the production of goods. But the interesting thing about this is, $1 billion is a lot of money. And we talked to a bunch of lawmakers.
Even in Washington.
Exactly. And we talked to a bunch of lawmakers who said they don't know what the money is going to be used for, and they hadn't been able to get answers from the White House. And so we spoke to a White House official about this, and notably the official said that that this provision, they were still a little bit vague, but they said that it was going to be used to support, quote, critical energy projects that have a defense nexus. So this could include anything about critical minerals, boosting the coal industry in the U.S., helping develop more domestic LNG. And so it's essentially, right. Exactly. And so it's essentially going to be used for private sector activity.
Just about anything, it sounds like. Does it sound, based on your reporting, that it's going to survive?
I think it's to be determined. I think that, the White House
subject to negotiation, like everything else.
Exactly. The White House also acknowledged that perhaps there is some more clarity that they need to shed to lawmakers on this when they heard that lawmakers were confused about it. And so I do think that it's going to be a discussion because, again, some of these lawmakers were saying this is a lot of money and we need more specifics about what it's going to be used for. Tyler,
there is an episodic soap opera going on in Washington right now. I don't know if the proper title is Trump-Musk or Musk-Trump or whatever, but it is going on. It's in its next phase in its episodic evolution, and that is Elon Musk saying about 3 a.m. Eastern time he regrets some of the things they said they went too far about Trump on social media. And the president talked to the New York Post Podforce One podcast to go over a bit of this. Let's listen.
I have no hard feelings. I was really surprised that happened.
You said he had problems. What kind of problems? I mean, is it the drugs?
I don't know what his problem is, really. I don't know. I haven't thought too much about it. I was a little disappointed.
Could you reconcile?
Say it?
Could you reconcile with him, do you think? Could you forgive him?
I guess I could, but, we have to straighten out the country.
It sounds like a therapy session. I'm sorry. Tyler?
Yeah, I mean, my colleagues at the Times reporting today that the president and Elon Musk spoke by phone Monday, which preceded this post early this morning from Elon Musk. I think it has become clear to Elon Musk that it is not in his benefit to fully sever his relationship with the president. He has a long history of posting things on social media that then he quickly comes to regret and tries to walk back. I think what is interesting is Trump's posture. Trump is not escalating the rhetoric, but Trump is also making clear he's not fully ready to re-engage with Elon Musk. He did a round of interviews with various reporters.
He doesn't want any more references to the Epstein files or knocking the big, beautiful so-called bill.
Right. I mean, really, Elon Musk went for the nuclear here. He both attacked the chief priority of Donald Trump here, his domestic policy bill, and also made accusations about him and Jeffrey Epstein. So there's a lot of ground for Elon Musk to have to make up with that relationship. And I think he saw that Republicans did not come rushing to his defense. For the vast majority of the party, they are chiefly loyal to Donald Trump, and I think Elon Musk is learning that lesson in real time.
And Shelby, it was made clear by the press secretary Caroline Leavitt today that there have been no steps undertaken, at least not yet in the administration, to do anything with Musk's current federal contracts, though the president hinted there might have been last week.
Yeah, you have to always ask yourself anytime Trump says something, whether it is serious or whether it is sort of him taking a knee-jerk reaction.
That's what makes this soap opera play.
Exactly. But what I think is notable in all of this is the White House did not want to have this fight. It was very clear. It was very clear publicly. It was very clear privately. There had been issues with Elon Musk for months before his departure, and they made a real effort to sort of leave on good terms.
Right.
And you
keep
saw
them on
also,
simmer.
Exactly.
Not have the pot boil over.
Exactly. And you also saw for days Elon Musk was criticizing the bill and Trump was silent. And it was only when he was asked publicly by a reporter that this sort of escalated. And that was intentional. They did not want this fight, and they very quickly moved to try to cool it back down.
Shelby Talcott, Tyler Pager. Thanks so much for joining me here at the family table. Next, my conversation with Democratic Congressional Campaign Chair and Congresswoman from Washington, Susan Del-Benny. That's next here on The Takeout. Welcome back. As you heard House Majority Leader Steve Scalise say just a few moments ago, Republicans in the House hold a very slim majority. My next guest, trying to change that. Washington Democratic Congresswoman Susan Del-Benny joins me now. She is the chair of the Democratic Congressional Campaign Committee, and one of that committee's principal goals is to re-elect House Democrats seeking another term. And in that regard, Susan, I want to ask you about David Hogg, who is a vice chair of the Democratic National Committee, who has a political action committee with $20 million. He says he wants to devote to defeating a quote-unquote asleep at the wheel House Democrats. That seems at odds with what you're trying to accomplish? How do you regard that effort? And do you believe David Hogg should remain a DNC vice chair?
You know, I think our number one goal is to make sure we take back the House. We need to make sure that we have a check on this president. We have a Congress that's going to do its job on oversight, to be a check to this president. So taking back the House is job one. Obviously, my job one. We are unified in our goal to take back the House. We only need 3 more seats to get there. That is a critical focus. I think we have an incredible opportunity to do that, and Democrats across the country are united in doing it, and that is our focus.
What about David Hogg?
Again, our focus across the country is making sure that we take back the majority, make sure that Hakeem Jeffries is the Speaker of the House. So we're not going to be distracted from that. That is our top priority, and Democrats are united in doing that.
Is David Hogg and his money a distraction?
I think anything that's not focused on making sure that we take back the House is not focused on the number one goal. And it's a number one goal because there's people across the country are outraged with what's happening. They see costs go up. They see a president that has a blindly loyal Congress letting him do whatever he wants to do. People want to make sure that we have a functional Congress. They want leaders who are going to stand up for their communities. We need to make sure we elect those leaders across the country. We have 14 Democrats who won in seats that Donald Trump won. To take back the majority, we're going to need to continue to win in these purple swing districts across the country. That needs to be our focus.
Speaking of that, according to the Cook Political Report, there are 18 Republican-held seats they regard as either toss-up or lean Republican. 18. 3 in California, 3 in Pennsylvania, 2 in Arizona, 2 in Iowa, 2 in Michigan. Is that your hunting ground?
I think we have opportunities all across the country. Clearly, we have a lot of, and we put out our map of our pickup opportunities, 35 districts across the country, many in places like Michigan, Pennsylvania, Arizona. But we have races everywhere. We have opportunities in Kentucky and Tennessee. So we are going to fight for all of these seats. And frankly, Republicans are running scared. That's why Elise Stefanik is not an ambassador to the United Nations. They pulled that nomination because they were scared. We know that the American people are outraged. The American people are on our side. And I think you're going to continue to see more and more districts in play as people fight to make sure that they have people who are going to stand up for them in Congress. And frankly, Republicans aren't interested in representing their communities. They aren't even interested in doing town halls in person with people because they don't want to hear what they have to say.
Susan, when I talk to House Republicans, even Senate Republicans, but specifically House Republicans, since they've put the vote on the board already, they're supremely confident, not just about the policy, but the overall politics of the president's economic agenda. You believe that's going to crash their majority next year. Why?
I absolutely believe that this is a critical vote that they've taken. It is about raising costs for American families. It's a broken promise. They promised, in fact, Trump promised on day one to lower costs for American families, and he's done nothing to do that. Costs have gone up. This bill guts health care for millions of Americans, guts nutrition programs, things like free school lunch. All of this raising prices on working families only to pay for tax breaks for billionaires. People see that across the country. You see that in polling on the bill. You see that when you talk to people in districts across the country. Republicans know that. They don't want to talk about it. They're trying to distract from that, but we're going to hold them accountable for these votes that they are taking that are going to impact working families across the country.
Susan, a moment ago you mentioned oversight. I want to play something that you're familiar with. It happened today when you were questioning Treasury Secretary Scott Bessent. Let's listen.
Mr. Secretary, do you support the government having a consolidated database containing Americans' sensitive financial, health, and personal information?
I support protecting Americans.
Do you support the consolidated database?
I support protecting Americans' personal information based on current law.
I think it's very concerning that you're not able to say no. This is not a partisan question.
What's that about?
There are ongoing efforts with DOJ to consolidate sensitive personal information of American citizens, putting together financial information, healthcare information, taxpayer information, all very sensitive information, to put that together in a database, to bring isolated information from different agencies together. It's extremely concerning, one, because it breaks rules of privacy that are in place. And what I was acting the secretary, there are rules. 6103 is a rule that was in place to make sure that taxpayer information is protected. When you combine this together, one, it can be weaponized against people, but also it puts at great risk if there's any malicious activity or cybersecurity risks. There's been no transparency over what they're doing, and I was asking the secretary to explain it, and he seemed unwilling to even enter into the conversation explaining. Our job is oversight in Congress. He has to answer, and his team has to answer to us about the work they're doing. And unfortunately, Republicans haven't been willing to call more and more folks into a hearing so we can do that oversight.
Congressman Susan DelBene, thank you for your time. I appreciate it.
Thank you.
Out with the new and in with the old. The president announces old names are making a comeback at several Army bases, but there is a catch. We'll explain when we come back here at the Takeout.
Won a lot of battles out of those forts. It's no time to change. And I'm superstitious.
That, of course, President Trump yesterday announcing that 7 more Army bases would soon be getting new names. Those bases, once named after Confederate soldiers, were renamed during the Biden administration. Now the Trump administration is changing them back to their original names, sort of. Instead of honoring Confederates, the Pentagon is dedicating the bases to service members with the same name and a notable service record of their own. Our Jim Axelrod shows how that policy played out earlier this year at 2 military installations, Fort Bragg in North Carolina and Fort Benning in Georgia.
For the second time in less than 2 years, the largest U.S. military base has a new name.
Today we honor a hero worthy of the name Bragg.
The new name is also its old name, Fort Bragg, which for more than a century honored General Braxton Bragg, a Confederate general and slave owner. A ceremony in 2023 changed Fort Bragg to Fort Liberty. Then, last fall,
should we change the name from Fort Liberty back to Fort Bragg?
Donald Trump made a promise that Defense Secretary Pete Hegseth kept.
That's right. Bragg is back.
But not that Bragg. The Army found a much more palatable one. Private First Class Roland L. Bragg, a World War II Silver Star and Purple Heart recipient.
At first, I thought it was a joke.
Rebecca Amirpour and Jennifer Bell are Roland Bragg's granddaughters and plenty proud of their grandpa.
But if his name was Roland Jones,
right.
I don't think we'd be sitting here.
No, we wouldn't.
While the military also sees Bragg as a brand, a place where some of the nation's fiercest warriors trained, it doesn't see any issue in the workaround that preserves the Bragg name. Gregory Anderson is the fort's commanding general.
To the extent that this was a painful name for people, what do you say to them?
Roland L. Bragg is someone that they can be proud of.
Do you feel it all used or manipulated?
I went through some different thoughts about it. I feel like using our grandfather's name is a way of bringing it back in a respectful way.
It's an absolute loophole.
Steve Moore's family is on the other end of the Army's renaming decision.
When I look back to my grandfather, between him, my father, myself, and my brother, we've got 110 years of service.
They were busting their buttons 2 years ago when the Pentagon changed Fort Benning, also named for a Confederate general, to Fort Moore. For both their father,
I have 2 battalions on this valley.
Lieutenant General Harold Moore, a highly decorated 32-year infantry commander, and their mother, Julia.
When your family found out that the original Fort Benning was going to become Fort Moore,
I broke down and cried. not because it was going to be named after Dad, but finally the Army was going to recognize the value of the military spouse.
But now, that too is being reversed and renamed for a corporal, Fred Benning, who served with honor for a couple of years during the First World War.
When I compare his short service in World War I to Mom and Dad's lifetime of service and everything they did and influenced, I have to ask the question, why?
There is no answer that will satisfy the family of Hal and Julia Moore, whose lifetime of valor and service to the Army lost out to a soldier who had one thing they did not: the right last name. Jim Axelrod, CBS News, Fayetteville, North Carolina.
My thanks to Jim Axelrod, one of the best writers in our business. I'm joined here at the Conversation Corner by the Director of Foreign and Defense Policy Studies at the American Enterprise Institute, Kori Schake. She was also on the Biden-era commission that made recommendations on how the military could pivot from names linked to the Confederacy. It's so great to have you with us. Thanks for joining me.
It's a pleasure.
How do you regard this name change back and forth?
Well, it's disappointing. The legislation, the National Defense Authorization Act, that necessitated the name changes only required that you remove the names of Confederates, of people who voluntarily took up arms against the government. So President Trump was mistaken yesterday when he said he could rename a fort in honor of Robert E. Lee. That would require changing the legislation. But unless it's named for a Confederate, the Secretary of Defense has the authority to make those changes. It's just, I think Mr. Moore's comments were really touching about what it meant to honor his father and his mother, who had contributed so much to the Army.
It seems like the administration, the current one, is just looking for a way to erase what the previous administration did and the work that you did carrying out the directives of this legislation.
I think that's right, yeah.
Is that how it feels to you?
Yeah, I think the commission was really proud of the work that we did. We spanned the spectrum from a sitting Republican congressman from Georgia to a liberal academic who wrote a book about his revelations about Confederate statues. And we came up with decision rules to prioritize people we hoped soldiers would take inspiration from. Medal of Honor recipients, people who'd fought in recent wars, more non-commissioned and enlisted soldiers rather than high-ranking soldiers. And we came up with a wonderful group, but there are lots of Americans that can be celebrated in this way.
So critical of the administration on this score, writing recently in The Atlantic, less critical of the coming parade to honor the Army, which many, not many, but some have said might look too militaristic, might give off a kind of visual whiff of authoritarianism. You're saying, calm down, it doesn't have to be that way.
Well, I think the Trump administration is giving us lots of things to be genuinely worried about. I don't think a military parade on the Army's 250th birthday is one of those things. I don't doubt that the president will behave badly, as he behaved badly yesterday at Fort Bragg, as he behaved badly giving the West Point commencement address, as he behaved badly on Memorial Day. But this is also an opportunity to celebrate the 0.5% of Americans who choose military service. And what I know from the book Jim Mattis and I wrote about civil-military relations several years ago is that the strongest correlate for somebody choosing to join the American military is familiarity. It's being part of a military family. It's living close to a military base. So giving more Americans exposure to our military is good for recruiting because soldiers are great.
And you write in The Atlantic, look, just because it's a Trump administration initiative doesn't mean it's necessarily a bad idea. And not only for recruitment, but a sense of genuine cross-generational pride in sacrifice and service, at least represented by the United States Army.
Yeah, I think that's exactly right. You know, Americans have been at war for 25 years in Iraq, in Afghanistan, in Syria, and elsewhere. And the young men and women who have borne that burden on our behalf deserve to be celebrated by the rest of us.
Rand Paul said yesterday that his feeling about it was, in our country, we looked at other nations that had big military parades and sort of said, that's too much. He would not make this choice. Is there any danger for the Trump administration in that regard with this particular Army-centric spectacle?
I think a lot of people understandably feel that way, right? That big military parades are what the Soviet Union and North Korea do, not what a country founded in fear of a standing army like ours does. But the good news is the United States, Americans don't need to be afraid of our military. And that's a good thing. And I think that will come through from the soldiers who are participating in the parade, even if it doesn't come through from the president.
Kori Schake, I appreciate your perspective very much. Thanks so much for coming in. Take me out to the Congressional Ball Game. Democrats battle Republicans in their annual salute to America's favorite pastime, and certainly my favorite pastime. I'll head back to Nats Park next, here on The Takeout. Tonight, a moment of political unity, somewhat rare in these parts, and it's being done for charity. Republicans and Democrats geared up for the annual Congressional Baseball Game, and we caught up with some of the players bright and early this morning.
I don't like this. I love this.
Okay.
Are you kidding me? This is the best time of year.
We may or may not go and recruit Republican candidates based on their playing ability in baseball. I'm not saying that we do. I'm not saying that we don't.
This is one of the most fun things we get to do.
If you were a Major League Baseball player and you had a walk-up song, what would that walk-up song be?
Oh, it would be Eye of a Tiger, no question.
Bad to the bone.
Usually what I do is I do Mi Gente or something by Mark Anthony.
That's a great question. They haven't asked me that. I do something by Metallica. You know, it'd probably be Hell's Bells.
It would be Eye of the Tiger.
Is this one of the last functionally, operationally bipartisan things left in D.C.?
It's one of the few. It's one of the few. There are very few. There are other contests that they do, sporting contests that they do throughout the year. So there's a softball game, there's golf, there's skeet shooting, there's soccer. But this is the biggie. I mean, this is the one that everybody, the whole town comes out for this.
Well, this is probably the largest one. But you know, there are other sports that we play as well. Actually, in the football game, Republicans and Democrats are on the same team.
Okay.
Basketball, we're on the same team as well. So there are other smaller sporting events. But when it comes down to politics in the Capitol, we are living in some divided times. But there are issues that still unify us. I think work around veterans and those things.
I think it's one of the few bipartisan events you actually see publicly on TV, but you know, we are doing a lot of things both on the legislative side, but you know, we do like charitable fundraisers together. My wife does cook-offs with other Republican Senate wives to help the March of Dimes and other types of charities. You don't get to see that all the time because you see us fighting, but you know, there are those moments where bipartisanship does break through.
A lot of these guys you'll see in the gym too, so like I've gotten to know Panetta pretty well out of California.
It is, and it's important that this tradition stays in place and that we find more opportunities for bipartisan activities, because it used to be that members lived here and their families would hang out, they'd see each other on the weekends or go to school together, church, what have you, and we really lack those opportunities now.
What is your favorite baseball movie?
The Sandlot, just a classic.
Bull Durham. Toss up between Bull Durham and Sandlot.
It's probably The Natural.
Sandlot, Sandlot, come on.
Of course, Field of Dreams.
Of course.
It's not heaven, it's Iowa.
That does it for today. You can catch tonight's episode of The Takeout and previous episodes on YouTube, your favorite social media platform, and of course, CBSNews.com. The Takeout is also available, we're happy to say, in podcast form. I want to say this to Brian Wilson, the songwriting genius behind the Beach Boys. Rest in peace. The Daily Report, coming up next on CBS News 24/7.